Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Today is day 5. As communicated before, in 8 lectures, our endeavor is to cover comprehensively the most important chapters of this beautifully written book, Indian Constitution at Work, which is a textbook in political science for class 11th. We've already covered 4 lectures. If you haven't attended those yet, please go through the recordings available on our YouTube channel. Today, let's discuss a legislature. And all you need to do is to tell us in the comment section whether this initiative of covering NCERTs in 8 lectures, whether it is aiding your civil services preparation or not. Do not forget to press the like button and subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, and share the links of these sessions with your friends and fellow aspirants. So let's get started and let's look at why do we need a parliament. But first things first, there are 3 organs of the state: legislature, executive, judiciary. Executive we discussed yesterday, legislature we will discuss today, and tomorrow we will discuss judiciary. But why do we need a parliament? Yes, for lawmaking. That is the principal objective, principal role, the most important function of the parliament, which is to legislate, which is to make laws. But lawmaking is just one function of the parliament. Parliament is packed with action. There are protests, there are demonstrations, there are walkouts, there are cries, there are screams, and sometimes chairs thrown at each other, microphones snatched, the copies of the bill torn. But be that as it may, whether you like it or not, Parliament is not just an institution for making laws, it is an institution in action. It is packed with action all the time. Are we a democracy? Yes. And what is a democracy? Something that we have discussed in one of these lectures. And I told you, democracy in India means rule by the people through representatives. Indirect democracy. But it is very important that this legislature, which is the parliament, it should be clearly representative of the entire country. If it is not representative enough, if it is not efficient enough, then it loses its significance. And that is the challenge that legislatures throughout the world are facing right now. And what is that challenge? The challenge is it is often controlled by the executive. Executive in the sense, we have a government at the center headed by, the government is headed by the Prime Minister. And we have the legislature, Parliament. One important thing that you need to keep in mind is that Parliament, which is the legislature at the center, it consists of President. President is an integral part of the Parliament. President is an integral part of the executive as well. And then there are 2 houses called Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha. So basically, law has to be passed by the parliament. But in reality, it is the executive which is controlling the parliament. How? These bills have to be introduced in the parliament, and most of the times there are the bills which are introduced by the government which pass. Because in this legislature, there is the dominance of the ruling political party or the ruling coalition. And that is what this NCERT tries to address right at the start by saying that in democracies, legislatures are losing their central place to the executive. Because in a cabinet form of democracy that we have, the cabinet form of government that we have, all the policies which are decided by the cabinet, which are decided by the executive, they ultimately pass in the legislature. But even then, no matter how strong the Prime Minister is, no matter how powerful the executive is, they have to attend the parliament. They have to answer the questions posed by the legislators. They have to prove their majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha. And this is where lies the immense potential and power of the legislature. So what is a legislature? Legislature, as the name suggests, is an institution whose primary job, responsibility is to make laws, to enact laws. But that's not the only job, that's not the only function, that's not the only role of the legislature. We will discuss multiple roles of the legislature today. But when it comes to Indian Parliament, we have legislature at the center called Indian Parliament. We have legislature in every state as well. And at the parliament, at the central level, we say we have a bicameral legislature. What do we mean by a bicameral legislature? A legislature, if it is composed of two houses. Is Indian Parliament bicameral? Yes, because there are two houses, Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. Similarly, at the state level, we have state legislatures, but there are some states where we have bicameral legislature, where there are two houses of the state legislature. One house is called Legislative Assembly, the other house is called Legislative Council. But there are only 6 states in India where we have bicameral legislature. Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka. These are the 6 states where we have bicameral legislature. In all other states, we have unicameral legislature. That means they have only one house of the state legislature, and that one house is known as the Legislative Assembly. But now there can be a question on your mind, which is addressed by NCERT. Why do we need two houses of the Indian Parliament? Why do we need a bicameral legislature? Why can't we have a single house? NCERT says that there are countries which have vast population and which are diverse as well. And you want to give different kinds of representations to these different sets of people, different diversities that we have. So in order to ensure that we give representation to all sections of the society, give representation to all geographical regions or parts, reflecting and respecting the diversity of India, that is why we need two houses. But bicameral legislature plays one more important role. And what is that important role? Every bill, every policy is revised twice. Twice in the sense, if a bill has been introduced in one house, then this bill has to go to the other house, which means every bill is debated twice. Every bill is discussed twice, which means there will be double check on every matter. Even if one house takes any decision in haste, there will be another house which will reconsider it. And that is what one member of the Constituent Assembly spoke in the Constituent Assembly. She said, an upper house could perform a useful function of being a revising body. One house will pass a bill, the other house will revise it if that bill is not just, is not fair, is not reasonable. Plus, who are the members who are elected to the Lok Sabha? We will discuss it today, but there are these members who are directly elected by the people. So in 2024 Lok Sabha elections, some of you would have come out of your homes and cast your vote, exercised your right to vote, and you elected 543 MPs to the Lok Sabha. That means in Lok Sabha, there are people who are directly elected. But in Rajya Sabha, there are people who are elected and there are people who are nominated as well. But these nominated people, they are nominated by the president from various fields. If they have done and made spectacular contributions to various fields such as art, literature, science, social service. And Ms. Purnima Banerjee said that this second house, those who could not enter into the rough and tumble of active politics could advise the lower house. which means in order to win the election, the Lok Sabha election, I have to campaign very hard in my constituency, sometimes bribe people as well. But what if there is an individual who has performed spectacularly well in various fields of art, literature, science, social service, and this person cannot go into the rough and tumble of politics, cannot campaign, cannot canvass for its votes, may not be in a position to bribe voters as well, may not like to polarize the society along the lines of religion, region, language or caste. Ultimately, unfortunately, such people are unelectable. That means they won't be elected because they are not in a position to polarize the society. But since they have made significant contributions to some fields, we still need them as part of the lawmaking exercise. And Rajya Sabha provides that option. 12 members will be nominated by the President, those who have made beautiful contributions in the fields of art, literature, science, social service. And these experts will be part of the lawmaking because Parliament is there to make laws and it will advise the lower house of Indian Parliament. That is why we have two houses. Why do we need two houses? Because a country such as India, which is geographically very vast as well, which is diverse as well, to give representation to all the regions and parts of India, to give representation to all the diversity that we have in India, we have two houses. And the second house will also serve another purpose. It will act as a revising house. That means a bill, a policy introduced by one house will be revised by the second house. So there will be double check. And that is the purpose of the second house. That is why do we need two houses? These are the two reasons provided in the NCERTs. Now what about Rajya Sabha? We say Rajya Sabha is the federal chamber of Indian Parliament. And what do we mean by a federal chamber of the Indian Parliament? That means Rajya Sabha basically represents the interests of the states in India. All the states in India, they are represented in the Rajya Sabha. And when I say states, although not mentioned in NCERT, states include those UTs as well, which have a legislative assembly. For example, Delhi, for example, Puducherry. So all states in India, all the UTs which have legislative assembly, they get represented in the Rajya Sabha. But what sort of representation? That's something that we need to understand now. Because representation can be in two ways. One representation is something that we see in United States of America, where they have a parliament and they call their parliament Congress. They also have a bicameral legislature. One is the House of Representatives and the other is Senate. Just like we have Rajya Sabha, they have the Senate. That means Rajya Sabha represents states in India, Senate represents states in United States. But there are 50 states in United States and all states have equal representation. Equal representation in the sense, every state, no matter how big or small it is, no matter how massive or smaller population base they have, every state would be in a position to send two of its representatives to the Senate. This is one form of representation. If you want to give representation to all states, then consider this. Give equal representation to all the states. From every state, two representatives will be sent to the upper house of US Congress, which is the Senate. But India has chosen a different type of representation. And it makes much more logical sense. How? Compare Uttar Pradesh with Sikkim. What is the population of Uttar Pradesh? Close to 2,000 lakhs, 1998.12 lakhs. And what is the population of Sikkim? 6.10 lakhs. If we give equal representation to Uttar Pradesh in the Rajya Sabha, Sikkim as well in Rajya Sabha, does it make any sense? That is why Rajya Sabha will have 31 MPs from Uttar Pradesh and Rajya Sabha will have 1 MP from Sikkim. Because we look into the population figures. Massive the population, more representation that state will have in the Rajya Sabha. This Rajya Sabha was first constituted in the year 1952. And the term of a Rajya Sabha MP is 6 years. But 1/3 members retire every 2 years. If 1/3 members retire every 2 years, that means every 2 years we will have election to fill these 1/3 vacancies. Then after 2 years again 1/3 vacancies need to be filled. That means at one point in time Rajya Sabha will never be dissolved, because at any point in time there will be representatives, MPs in the Rajya Sabha. Unlike Lok Sabha, where the term is 5 years for all the MPs, and there comes a time when you have completed this 5-year term, the entire Lok Sabha gets dissolved and a fresh Lok Sabha has to be constituted. But that is not the case with Rajya Sabha, because 1/3 members retire every 2 years. Which means every 2 years there will be elections to fill this 1/3 vacancy, which means at any given point in time there won't be Rajya Sabha dissolved, because members would be present. And that is why we say Rajya Sabha is the permanent house of Indian Parliament. But this is where I can anticipate a confusion in your mind. Sir, there is a confusion. What is the confusion? Sir, on one hand you are saying the term of the Rajya Sabha MP is 6 years, and on the other hand you are saying 1/3 of the members retire every 2 years. It doesn't make sense. Then by that logic the term of a Rajya Sabha MP is only 2 years. Now listen to me carefully. When Rajya Sabha was constituted in 1952, and this is something which is not mentioned in NCERT, and I am going beyond NCERT because this is a point that is important for you to understand. If Rajya Sabha was constituted in 1952, then the term of the Rajya Sabha MP is 6 years. Which means when we will reach 1958, all these MPs who got elected to Rajya Sabha in 1952, their term would end in 1958. That means in 1958, Rajya Sabha would have nobody. Rajya Sabha would be dissolved. It will be just like the Lok Sabha, right or wrong? Yes. Then this is where in 1954, all those MPs who were elected to Rajya Sabha in 1952, 1/3 of them, they were made to retire. You please retire after 2 years. Why? Because we need to ensure that Rajya Sabha is the permanent house of Indian Parliament. But why should we retire? We will elect you again, but right now you retire. Why should I retire? Somebody else should retire. Okay, let's solve this confusion. We will keep a bowl, we will extract lots, through draw of lots, through chit system, we will extract names of those 1/3 MPs who will be made to retire. And when these 1/3 names were picked up, they were made to retire. That means in 1954 itself, those 1/3 were elected again. So they were made to retire after 2 years. But when they were made to retire after 2 years, then they contested elections again, fresh election. Now when you contest election as fresh, that means your term is 6 years. Which basically means now you will remain in office till 1960. Then in 1956, again 1/3 members were made to retire. And when they were made to retire, fresh election was conducted. That means now their term is till 1962. That means now there will be some members whose term will be over in 1958, some whose term will be over in 1960, some whose term will be over in 1962. That is how we will ensure 1/3 members retire every 2 years. Their term is over every 2 years. That means now all the MPs in Rajya Sabha that we have, their term is not same. Term is same of 6 years, but the period of their term, the period of their tenure is not same. Because for some, it will end in 2020. For some, it will end in 2022. For some, in 2024. Now, the way I explained it, it might have caused one confusion in your mind. What is that confusion? For example, if this is the Rajya Sabha seat from UP, for example, and the term of this Rajya Sabha MP is 6 years. What if after 1 year I resign? Or after 1 year I am dead? Or after 1 year I am disqualified? That means this seat is vacant now. We have to elect someone else to occupy this seat. When we elect a new person to occupy this seat, you will remain in office only for the remainder of the term. And the remainder of the term is 5 years. Sir, by that logic, these 1/3 MPs who were made to retire in 1954, they should have remained in office only till 1958, the remainder of the term, because 4 years were left. 1954 and 1956, these were the only 2 years where exception was made just to ensure that Rajya Sabha remains a permanent house of Indian Parliament, where through draw of lots, 1/3 members were made to retire. And then election was conducted, and then they had to occupy their seat for full 6-year term. This is how Constitution ensures that Rajya Sabha is the permanent house of Indian Parliament. And then how are these MPs to Rajya Sabha elected by the states? We have discussed that in the 3rd chapter when we discussed election and representation. In that lecture, I explained you, I even told you the formula that is required to get the minimum number of votes required for somebody to be elected to the Rajya Sabha. Then if the Rajya Sabha is the upper house, Lok Sabha is the lower house. And Lok Sabha elections, how are these MPs elected? The entire country is divided into 543 constituencies. And when the entire country is divided into 543 constituencies, then through first past the post system, something that we discussed in the elections chapter, 543 MPs are elected to Lok Sabha and their term is for 5 years. But even before 5 years, Lok Sabha can be dissolved. Why? If the Prime Minister advises the President that you dissolve Lok Sabha even before completing 5-year term, Lok Sabha can be dissolved. Or if a government loses majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha and there is no other alternative government possible, in that case, since no government is possible, Lok Sabha is dissolved, which paves way for fresh elections. So although the term is 5 years, but Lok Sabha can be dissolved even before completing this 5-year term. That's what we call the Lok Sabha. Now this statement is mentioned here, the number has not changed since 1971 census. Can you tell me why? Original idea was that if the population increases, corresponding to that, the number of elected representatives in Lok Sabha should also increase. Which means in a state, if the population increases, corresponding to that increase in the population, more seats should be made available to that state. Clear or not? And this is what happened. After every census, because census is carried out every 10 years, which gives us the picture about the population of this country. Constitution would say that after every census, there should be delimitation. And what do we mean by this delimitation? Something that we discussed in the election chapter as well. Basically, you are redrawing the electoral boundaries of India. Which means if the population increases, corresponding to that, the number of seats should also increase. But where is the population increasing? Where do we increase the number of seats? That is decided by this body called Delimitation Commission. And it happened. Delimitation happened after the census of 1951. Delimitation happened after the census of 1961. Delimitation happened after the census of 1971 as well. But this is where the southern states protested. Southern states, they said that it is like disincentive towards us. It is incentive for bad performance. The southern states were asked, can you elaborate? The southern states said that we have been successful in implementing family planning programs. So somewhere down the line, we have been in a position to stabilize our population. But these Bimaru states in the northern India, their term, not mine, the Bimaru states in the northern India, for example, Bihar, for example, Rajasthan, for example, Uttar Pradesh, for example, Madhya Pradesh, they are unable to control their population. Their population is exploding. And if the population is exploding, corresponding to that, they will have more representatives in Lok Sabha as well. So northern India will have more representatives in Lok Sabha as compared to southern India. So basically you are penalizing us for doing good and you are incentivizing these northern states for doing bad because they are unable to control their population. This is where in 1976 the constitution was amended. Srimati Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister and the constitution said now no more delimitation for till 2001. And even if we go for delimitation, the number of seats in Lok Sabha will remain frozen till 2026. That means till 2026, there won't be an increase in the number of seats in Lok Sabha or legislative assemblies. That is why in Lok Sabha, this number 543 is fixed since 1971, or it has not changed since 1971. Let's look at something else. What does Parliament do? Function number one, legislative function. What is this legislative function? It makes laws. There is something called Schedule 7 of the Indian Constitution, which talks about distribution of powers. Or to make it even more clear, distribution of legislative subjects. There are some items which are mentioned in the union list. There are some items which are mentioned in the state list. What is the other list? Concurrent list. All the items which are mentioned in the union list, who has the power to make laws on these subjects? Parliament. Subjects such as defense, external affairs, communication, banking, insurance, citizenship, extradition, so on and so forth. Who has the power to make laws on any item mentioned in the state list? State legislature. For example, police. For example, law and order. For example, agriculture. For example, gambling. Who has the power to make a law on any item mentioned in the concurrent list? Both Parliament as well as state legislature. For example, criminal procedure, civil procedure, education, forests. All these are the items mentioned in the concurrent list. So when we say the first job of the Parliament is to legislate, to make laws, that means Parliament's job, function, role is to make laws on all items mentioned in the union list on all items mentioned in the concurrent list. That is the legislative function, that is the legislative power, role of the Parliament. There is one interesting statement mentioned in NCERT. Members other than ministers can also introduce bills, but they have no chance of being passed. These bills, and I've told you what is a bill previously, bill is a proposal. Bill is like a draft. The draft may change. For example, I'm telling you, write an answer on elections. And you are giving me your first draft. Sir, this is how the answer looks like. I'm asking you to make changes. Then you present a second draft, then third draft, then fourth draft, and this is the perfect answer. And now this becomes the final law. So bill is basically a draft. Bill is basically a proposal. But who will introduce this bill? Bill can be introduced by a minister who is part of the executive. Bill can be introduced by a non-minister. And a bill introduced by a non-minister is what we call a private member's bill. And most of the times it is the government bill. It is the bill introduced by a minister which gets passed. And NCERT says bills, members other than ministers can also introduce bills, but they have no chance of being passed except without the support of the government. Which means the government support is required because government has no majority. That means majority legislators are part of the government, are part of the ruling party, are part of the ruling coalition. Without their support, this private member's bill cannot be passed. Have there been instances in India where private members' bill have been passed? Yes. In total, 14 private members' bills since the first Lok Sabha have been passed by the Parliament. Just 14. Which means this statement is correct. Members other than ministers can also introduce bills, but they have no chance of being passed without the support of the government. Role number 1 of the Parliament, legislative function. Role number 2, controls the executive. And how does Parliament control the executive? Through various tools, which we will discuss in detail later. Through motions, through resolutions, through questions, through debates, through discussions. That's how the legislature, the Parliament, controls the executive. That is role number 2. Role number 3, financial function. We say Parliament is the custodian of public purse. The taxes that you and me pay, the taxes that the government imposes on the people, almost all the taxes, all the investments raised by the government, all the loans raised by the government, they get deposited into a fund called Consolidated Fund of India. Does that mean Mr. Nitin Gadkari can withdraw money from this Consolidated Fund of India at any point in time for the construction of roads, highways, motorways in India? No. He has to seek parliamentary approval. That means the custodian of this public purse is the Parliament. Without approval of the Parliament, not even a single penny can be withdrawn from the Consolidated Fund of India. And that is why we say, when this NCERT chapter started, it said the job of the legislature is not only to make laws, although law making is one of the most important functions of the Parliament, but it's not the only job. Its job is to legislate, but its job also is to control the executive. Its job is to control the executive, but also it has a financial function. Not just that, it has representation role. Look at the Parliament, and we can say Parliament is the nation in miniature. There are people belonging to different religious communities, caste communities, linguistic communities, states, tribals, scheduled castes, OBCs and others. So if we want a true representative picture of what this nation is all about, for that we have to look at the Parliament. So role of the Parliament is that it represents the divergent views of different religious, cultural, social groups in India. That's another role. And then another role is debating function. We say Parliament is the highest forum of debate in the country, and there is no limitation to what the Parliament can discuss. Parliament can discuss anything inside the Parliament, inside the House. The legislators, the parliamentarians can discuss anything, and they can speak freely on any matter. And that is how parliamentarians are able to represent the views of their constituencies as well. The kind of debates that we witness in the Parliament, that tells us that this is another important role that is performed by the Parliament. And on top of that, Parliament has a constituent function. What is this constituent function? If we need to amend the Constitution, for that, do we have to call the Constituent Assembly again? Do we have to revive the Constituent Assembly again? No. It is this Parliament which has been elected by the people, which will have the power to amend the Constitution. So another role of the Parliament is that it has the power of discussing and enacting changes, amendments to the Constitution of India. Then another role is electoral function. Who elects or who participates in the election of the President of India? Members of the Parliament. Who participates in the election of the Vice President of India? Members of the Parliament. That is another role. And they perform some judicial functions as well, although it should not be mentioned as the judicial function, because that's not the judicial function. You can say it is a quasi-judicial function. And what is this quasi-judicial function? It has the power to vote to impeach the President of India. It has the power to vote to remove the Vice President, to remove the judges of the High Court and Supreme Court. But sir, why do we call it a quasi-judicial function? If you are saying it should not have been judicial function mentioned in the NCERT, what is the job of the judiciary? To punish you if you have violated any crime. But how will the judiciary punish you? There has to be investigation. Matter will go to the court. You will have your lawyer. The state will have their own lawyer. And ultimately, after I am hearing all the arguments, I will come to the conclusion that you are guilty and you are to be hanged by your neck till death. Which means I will consider evidence and then give judgment. But that's the job of the judiciary. Judges are not part of impeaching the President of India. But Parliament, as an institution, can impeach the President of India, but President will be given the option of defending himself. Which means one house of the Parliament will investigate the charges against the President and ultimately come to a conclusion whether President should be impeached or not. Because President is impeached on the grounds of violation of the Constitution. There will be one house which will investigate whether President has indeed violated the Constitution or not. That's a judicial function. But since Parliament is not judiciary, that is why we say it's a quasi-judicial function. Not completely judicial, but because there are legislators involved as well, it is quasi-judicial function. So these are the functions performed by the Parliament. Legislative function, control over the executive, financial function. Parliament represents the divergent views of the diversity that we have. It has debating function, it has a constituent function, it has an electoral function, it has a judicial, or the most appropriate term is the quasi-judicial function. But then what are the powers of the Rajya Sabha? If you are only reading NCERTs for the preparation of the civil services examination, let me tell you something. if you read NCERTs on your own, there may be instances which may confuse you, or maybe you're hearing it for the first time. There are also errors and mistakes in the NCERT as well. And today we will flag 2 or 3 mistakes and errors. How? Powers of the Lok Sabha are mentioned here, powers of the Rajya Sabha are mentioned here. Under this powers of the Lok Sabha, it is mentioned that you have the power to amend the constitution. That is not the only power, that's not the power of the Lok Sabha only. Constitution is amended by Parliament. And I have told you Parliament includes President, Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. So if Constitution is to be amended, for that a bill should be introduced in the Parliament. This is a bill called Constitutional Amendment Bill. It should be passed by both houses of Indian Parliament, then signed by the President. Then Constitution can be amended. So by looking at this comparison of powers of the Lok Sabha, powers of the Rajya Sabha, in powers of the Lok Sabha, if it is mentioned amends the Constitution, it might give a misleading sense that this is the power of Lok Sabha only. But that's not the case. Similarly, it approves the proclamation of emergency. Even Rajya Sabha has to approve. So if President's rule is to be imposed, national emergency is to be imposed, financial emergency is to be imposed, both houses of the Indian Parliament have to approve these emergencies, not Lok Sabha alone. Although under Rajya Sabha, it is mentioned approves constitutional amendments. This may also be misleading. So somebody is amending the constitution, you are only approving it. No. Both Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha, you have an equal role in amending the constitution, equal power in amending the constitution. Similarly, when we say control over the executive by asking questions, supplementary questions, adjournment motions, so on and so forth, there are some powers which are exclusive to Lok Sabha, and there are some powers which are exclusive to Rajya Sabha. And that is what we call special powers of Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha. And what are these special powers? Number 1, and this is mistake number 2 in NCERT. What is this mistake? Read this, and if you have read polity, you would be able to flag it as well. As you know, Rajya Sabha is an institutional mechanism to provide representation to the states. Its purpose is to protect the powers of the states. Therefore, any matter that affects the states must be referred to it for its consent and approval. This much is clear. Thus, and this is where the problem starts, thus if the Union Parliament wishes to remove a matter from the state list over which the state legislature can make law to either union list or concurrent list, the approval of Rajya Sabha is necessary. This is incorrect. Why? There is a special power of Rajya Sabha, but that is what we call Article 249. And what is this 249? This is a state list. If Rajya Sabha passes a resolution by 2/3 majority, that it is in national interest that Parliament should make a law on any item mentioned in the state list or on this item mentioned in the state list, then Parliament will be empowered to make a law on state list. Sir, what are you saying? I am saying tomorrow, if Rajya Sabha passes a resolution and says it is in national interest that Parliament, which means Parliament, President, Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, all the three together, that Parliament should make a law on police in Punjab, because it is in national interest for Parliament to legislate on police in Punjab, because maybe there is disturbance in Punjab, then Parliament becomes empowered to make law on police with respect to Punjab. That is what NCERT should have mentioned here. What they have mentioned here is, if one item is to be shifted from state list to concurrent list or from state list to union list, it requires Rajya Sabha's approval. Yes, it requires Rajya Sabha's approval, but that is not the special power, because this would require approval of the Lok Sabha as well. Not just Lok Sabha, it would require the ratification by at least half of the state legislatures in India, because this is a constitutional amendment affecting the federal feature of Indian Constitution. Long story short, if any provision of the Indian Constitution, which we say is a federal feature, and there is Article 368 which explains which are these federal features. If any of these things are changed, then Parliament will pass this bill, but before this bill is sent to the President, this bill is sent to all the state legislatures in India. And only when at least half of these states accept this constitutional amendment, then this bill is sent to the President for approval. And President has no other option but to sign this constitutional amendment bill, which means the President does not have any veto power on a constitutional amendment bill. Which means one such federal feature is if you alter 7th schedule of the Constitution. Which means if you take one item in the state list and shift it to a union list or shift it to a concurrent list, for that you need to amend the Constitution. But what sort of amendment? Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they have to pass this constitutional amendment bill. Then this bill will be sent to all the state legislatures in India. Only when at least half of the states ratify this constitutional amendment, that means approve this constitutional amendment, can this bill be sent to President for approval. Instead of mentioning Article 249, NCERT has mentioned a different concept, which is a mistake and error. Another mistake. Then, powers which are exercised only by the Lok Sabha. Then there are powers that only Lok Sabha exercises. Like, who can initiate a money bill? A bill which talks about money matters. And what is a money matter? One such money matter is, I told you, there is Consolidated Fund of India. Without approval of the Parliament, the executive cannot withdraw even a single penny from Consolidated Fund of India. But how does Parliament give approval that executive, that minister, you can withdraw money from Consolidated Fund of India? By passing a money bill. And this money bill can be introduced only in the Lok Sabha. Introduced, but it has to be passed by both. It can be introduced only in Lok Sabha, and if it is passed in Lok Sabha by simple majority, then this bill goes to Rajya Sabha. What are the options available with Rajya Sabha? Rajya Sabha can accept a money bill, but Rajya Sabha cannot reject a money bill. Rajya Sabha cannot amend a money bill. Rajya Sabha can only make recommendations to a money bill. Sir, what is the difference between amendment and recommendation? I am asking you, write an article on money bill. You are sending it to me. This article was written in 1 page. I have added my own inputs into your answer, and now this answer is 5 pages. What am I doing? I am amending your answer by adding something to this answer, by removing something from your answer, by deleting something from your answer. This is called amendment. Rajya Sabha cannot amend a money bill. What Rajya Sabha can do? It can make recommendations. That means your answer on a money bill, I am not changing anything. I am just sending you one more copy. These are the points you should have mentioned in your answer. I am not changing your answer. I am just giving you suggestions that this is how you should have written the answer. That is recommendation. So Rajya Sabha can only suggest recommendations without changing anything in the money bill. Rajya Sabha can make recommendations to a money bill. But if these recommendations are not acceptable to Lok Sabha, doesn't matter, the bill is passed. Or Rajya Sabha may not act on a money bill, may not pass a money bill, will keep the money bill pending. At the expiry of 14 days, it is deemed that money bill has been passed by both houses of the Indian Parliament. But now you might ask, why Rajya Sabha has a limited role when it comes to a money bill? Can you explain why? The Rajya Sabha is elected by MLAs. That means not by the people directly. Therefore, Constitution stops short of giving certain powers to Rajya Sabha. That's the explanation given by NCERT. An even more clear explanation is there was a slogan that was raised during the American Revolution called no taxation without representation. When you impose a tax, any bill calling for the imposition of a tax is a money bill. But we say only those people should impose tax whom we have elected. And we have elected people directly to Lok Sabha. We have not elected people directly to the Rajya Sabha. So only Lok Sabha should have special power in the imposition of tax. And then we will hold them accountable. That is why special power is given to Lok Sabha in these money matters as compared to the Rajya Sabha. Now there is another question that we need to address, and the question is, how does Parliament make law? For example, here is a bill. Now what is a bill? Bill is a proposal, bill is a draft. And let's go back to the first slide that we discussed. There is a tendency that the supremacy of Parliament has been reducing and executive is controlling the legislature. In fact, this was one of the questions asked in 2024 mains examination. Although just by reading NCERTs, you would not have been in a position to answer that question. But that's a separate matter. But be that as it may, the point is then NCERT further would say that even the strongest Prime Minister, even the strongest executive will have to attend Parliament, address Parliament, answer questions of the legislators and ensure that they have majority in the Parliament. This is where lies the potential of the Parliament. Why am I repeating this point? Listen to me carefully. Normally what happens? A bill is introduced. Where? In either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. But please understand, bills can be of various types. A bill introduced by a minister is a government bill. A bill introduced by a non-minister is a private member's bill. Then there is a bill called a money bill, financial bill, ordinary bill, constitutional amendment bill, multiple bills. But here our focus will be on ordinary bill. So tell us, what is an ordinary bill? An ordinary bill is a bill which is neither a money bill, nor a financial bill, nor a constitutional amendment bill. That bill is an ordinary bill. Sir, can you give one example? For example, we want to increase the marriageable age of women in India from current 18 to 21. This is an ordinary bill. This bill will be introduced in either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. And then what happens? After this introduction, this bill may be sent to a select committee, or this bill may be sent to a joint parliamentary committee. For example, Waqf bill was introduced by the government recently. There were protests against that bill by the opposition. The government was forced to send this bill to a committee. What is this? This is the control of Parliament. This is the control of the legislature over the executive. So this bill will be introduced in the House, and then it may be sent to the select committees. Committee in the sense, Parliament has to pass so many laws, so many bills. Imagine a situation that I have to teach you all subjects of civil services examination, but I have limited time, which means I will teach you polity thoroughly and I will sacrifice time for other subjects, which means other subjects I will rush through because I don't have enough time to teach you all the subjects, which means on some subjects I will teach you well, on some subjects I will rush through the syllabus. Same goes with Parliament as well. Parliamentarians, they are not experts. Parliament does not meet every single day. And if Parliament has to discuss every bill in great detail, Parliament does not have the time to discuss each and every bill in great detail. That is why committees are set up. There will be members of the committee. Let's say 31 people will be part of this committee. 31 MPs will be part of this committee. And this bill will be sent to this committee. You discuss this bill. You debate this bill. You dissect this bill. And then prepare a report and tell us what is good, bad, ugly, how can we make this bill better, so on and so forth. Suggest us that report. And then there will be other 31 MPs who will look into another bill, another 31 MPs, another bill. This way, the entire Parliament is looking at bills, but individually in the form of committees. And maybe this committee will also meet people. For example, a joint parliamentary committee was set up to review the Waqf bill which was introduced by the government. And then this joint parliamentary committee met people as well, sought the opinion of the people. And then the debates, the discussions on this bill by the members of this committee, by the dealings, suggestions of the public as well, report will be presented, and this report will be given to the House, which can be Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. But this report is not binding on the House. House may either accept this report or reject this. Whether it accepts or rejects, then there is a detailed discussion on this bill. If the bill is accepted, it is sent to another House. If it is sent to another House, other House can give its approval again, and then after that, bill is sent to the President for approval, President signs, and then this bill becomes a law. These are the various stages through which the bill goes through. And normally, there are 3 stages of a bill. The first stage is the introduction. I am a member of the Parliament, I want to introduce a bill. This is called stage 1. I will introduce this bill. Normally, there is no dispute. Nobody will stop me from introducing this bill. But sometimes the members of the Parliament will say, no, don't let him to even introduce this bill. For example, there was a time when Dr. Shashi Tharoor tried to introduce a bill to decriminalize homosexuality. He was not allowed to even introduce that bill, because the majority of the members of the Lok Sabha objected, said, no, don't allow him to even introduce this bill. But if he is allowed, he will introduce this bill. He will also mention the objects and reasons. What is the objective of this bill? What are we trying to achieve through this bill? What is the reason I am bringing about this bill? That I have to say in my speech before the House. And that is what we call first stage of the bill. And then in the second stage, The bill may be sent to a select committee. The bill may be sent to elicit public opinion. The bill may be sent to a joint parliamentary committee. And once those reports are given, then the House considers those reports, either accepts them or rejects them. And then the third stage is a mere formality. Formality in the sense, the bill is to be voted upon. If the bill is voted upon, if the bill gets majority, it will then go to the other house. And in other house also, it will go through these stages. But now there is a point. There is a bill X. Lok Sabha approves it. Rajya Sabha rejects it. If it is not a money bill. Why, sir? Because I told you a money bill cannot be rejected by the Rajya Sabha. Rajya Sabha can at best suggest recommendations to a money bill. If this bill is passed by one house, is not acceptable to the other house, in that case there is something called deadlock. And to resolve this deadlock, there is something provision called joint sitting of the parliament. That means now Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they will come together and discuss this bill. And what do you think? Whose side will the decision be? It will favor Lok Sabha. Why? Because of the numerical strength of the Lok Sabha. Lok Sabha has 543 MPs, Rajya Sabha has 245 MPs. It is the will of the Lok Sabha which prevails over Rajya Sabha in this joint sitting of the two houses. Look at what is mentioned here. Special provision in the respect of money bill. A money bill shall not be introduced in the Council of States, which means a money bill cannot be introduced in the Rajya Sabha. Where is it mentioned? Article 109. Why am I highlighting this? I'll tell you slightly later when we will discuss previous year's question papers. Specifically, the questions which were asked in 2024 prelims. And this question was asked. Again, let me tell you, when I teach legislature, parliament to my students in the classes, this chapter legislature, it takes almost 20 hours. And here NCERT expects me to complete it in one session, which can be of 1 hour 15 minutes. Why? Because a lot of things are not mentioned here. And that is why I keep on repeating, NCERT is just for your conceptual clarity. But to prepare for the civil services exam, to write this exam, you need to also go through the reference book. But NCERT is to gain conceptual clarity. And now another concept that we need to understand is how does Parliament control the executive? But before that, let me ask you, are you able to understand whatever we are discussing today? Yes, everybody? Okay. How does Parliament control the executive? In a parliamentary democracy, something that we discussed yesterday, executive is drawn from legislature. That means who is the Prime Minister, who are the ministers? They have to be necessarily members of the legislature as well. Yes, there is an exception that I can also be appointed as a minister, but within 6 months of my appointment, I have to get myself elected to either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. But long story short, executive in a parliamentary democracy is drawn from the legislature. But then this parliamentary democracy may what is called slip into cabinet dictatorship. That means it is the cabinet which will decide how the parliament is to be run. Because who can summon Parliament? President. On the advice of the Cabinet. What sort of bills are to be introduced? That government decides. Yes, there can be private members' bills as well, but those bills we have seen only 14 have passed since the enactment of the Constitution. That is why we say there is one practice that we should follow. Let opposition have its say and let government have its way. What does that mean? Let opposition oppose, because that's their job. But let the government have its way. That means whatever bills they want to be passed, they should be allowed to pass, because that is how they can govern. But even outside that, there are ways that the legislature can hold the executive accountable. For example, questions. Questions will be asked, and the first hour of any parliamentary day session is what we call question hour. If you have watched any parliamentary proceeding, for example, there are normally 3 sessions of the parliament. There is budget session, monsoon session, winter session. Any specific day, the first hour of a day is reserved for questions, where questions will be asked to the ministers. That's how you can keep the executive under check. After question hour, there is the agenda. Maybe today we will discuss the Waqf bill, or today our agenda is we will discuss the situation in Ukraine, or our agenda is we will discuss the condition in Manipur, what is exactly happening in Manipur, what the government is doing in Manipur or not doing in Manipur. Through these discussions, through these questions, there will be a check on the government, control over the executive. And sometimes between question hour and the agenda, there is another interesting hour called 0 hour. Because in question hour, executive is given questions in advance. Sir, are you saying this question paper has been leaked to executive before? Yes. Why? Because they have to come up with an answer. They can't lie inside the parliament. Otherwise, for every question that I will ask the executive, the minister, he will say, give me some time, I will get back to you. Like a teacher who doesn't entertain any doubts in the class. Why? Because he doesn't know the answer. Or if you force him to answer that question, I will come back to you. That is why we give questions to the ministers in advance. Come up with an answer. And then they reply before the parliament, because they are now prepared with an answer. But sometimes questions can be asked to the ministers without prior submitting these questions. And that is what we call 0 hour. But here, the executive, the ministers, they are not bound to reply. But questions are asked. You and me, we will come to know through the proceedings of the House from Sansad TV what a minister is saying, what a minister is not saying, why is he not replying, or how deep is or are her replies. Through this, we exercise control over the executive. We may not even approve, the legislature may not approve bills introduced by the government. That's how we can keep control. Although this happens in a coalition government or in a government where the government does not have the full majority in the parliament. For example, if one nation, one election is to be implemented, for that you need to amend the constitution, and for that you need a special majority, which the BJP and its allies do not have either in Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. Which means unless and until you bring opposition on board, you collaborate with the opposition, there is no way one nation, one election can be implemented. And without collaboration, if you introduce this bill will be rejected by the House. which means now legislature is controlling the executive. Similarly, financial control. Sir, what is this financial control? When Nirmala Sitharaman, Honorable Finance Minister, the best finance minister we ever have had, pun unintended. If you would have heard her budget speech, she would say, I propose to allocate these many crores to this scheme. She's proposing it. She won't say, I am giving 10 lakh crores to this sector. I am proposing to allocate 5,000 crore for this particular scheme. When you are proposing to whom? Legislature. Unless and until legislature approves it, you will not be able to withdraw that money and allocate for that scheme. So financial control is how legislature is keeping executive under check. And the most powerful weapon is the no confidence motion. Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. He remained in office for 13 days. 13th day, no confidence motion is issued. Lok Sabha is saying we do not have the confidence in the Prime Minister. Discussion takes place, voting takes place, and Lok Sabha passes this no confidence motion. That means by a majority. That means by simple majority. That means by more than half of the members present and voting. And what Mr. Vajpayee had to do? Resign. So the most powerful weapon that legislature has in controlling the executive is the no confidence motion. But then, what do the committees of the parliament do? And I've told you what is the idea behind committees. Parliament does not have all the time to discuss all the bills together. All the 543 MPs in Lok Sabha, 245 in the Rajya Sabha, they are fixated on one particular bill. That means they won't be then in a position to pass the quantity and the quality of the bills that we demand, that we need. That's why there are committees. And this is where there is another mistake in NCERT book. It says since 1983, India has developed a system of parliamentary standing committees, wherein the fact is this system developed from 1993. Initially, we had 17 departmentally related standing committees. Today, we have 24 departmentally related standing committees. And what is a departmentally related standing committee? If there is a bill which concerns women and child welfare, for example, if we want to increase the minimum marriageable age of women from 18 to 21, for that there will be a specific standing committee related to bills for women and children. This departmentally related standing committee will have 31 MPs. 21 will be from the Lok Sabha, 10 will be from the Rajya Sabha. And together they will discuss this bill and then present a report. And this departmentally related standing committee, they play a very important role when it comes to budget. They will ask questions to the minister. Why do you need this much money? What did you do with the money that we gave you previously? Why were you not able to spend the money that we allocated to you previously? What exactly have you achieved by spending this money? These questions are accountability. Your father asking you questions. I gave you money to buy an online course to prepare for civil services exam. Tell me how many marks are you scoring in the mock tests? And you will shiver, because now you are held accountable by your parents. Similarly, executive is held accountable by the legislature by these departmentally related standing committees. And that's their job. But importantly, how does Parliament regulate itself? By making rules. Rules of business, and procedure. For example, you might have read that 141 MPs of Lok Sabha were suspended by the presiding officer. Mahua Moitra was expelled from the Lok Sabha. These MPs were suspended for the remainder of the session. How Parliament regulates itself? By making rules. And to implement these rules, the most powerful role is that of a presiding officer. And who is that presiding officer? Speaker of Lok Sabha. And the chairperson, who is the Vice President of India in the Rajya Sabha. And NCERT towards the end just makes a reference to anti-defection law. And what is this anti-defection law? This NCERT says there is one more way in which these presiding officers control the behavior of members. Anti-defection law. If BJP gives you ticket to contest elections and you win the election, for example, you are Mr. Ravi Kishan, who has won the election on a BJP ticket from a constituency in UP. Now you are the member of the Lok Sabha. If you resign from BJP, you will be disqualified under anti-defection law. If you vote against the directive of the BJP, which means you violate the whip issued by the BJP, you will be disqualified under anti-defection law. If you join another political party, you will be disqualified. And who will disqualify you? The presiding officer. This law was passed in 1985, known as the anti-defection law. And this law was amended in 2003 as well, 91st Amendment, which means any defector cannot hold a ministerial position. Which means previously what would happen, if I was given a ticket by the Congress to contest elections, I won the election. Now I am a Congress MP in Lok Sabha, but BJP is in a position to form the government. They have formed the government. They are asking me, can you join us? I say, but I will be disqualified. I said, let you be disqualified, I will still make you a minister. This 91st Amendment says, a defector, unless and until you get re-elected, you should not be appointed as a minister. And this completes our NCERT chapter titled The Legislature, which is part of our Constitution at Work. Then let's look at some of the questions and let's see if you are able to answer these questions. With reference to the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, consider the following statements. While any resolution for the removal of the Speaker of the Lok Sabha is under consideration, he shall not preside, he shall not have the right to speak, he shall not be entitled to vote on the resolution in the first instance. Which of these statements is or are correct? Tell me in the comment section. And the reason why I picked this question is to tell you that even if you would have read this NCERT book, there was no way for you to answer this question because you can't find this information in NCERT. That is why you need to follow a reference book. When the Speaker of the Lok Sabha is to be removed, he shall not preside the Lok Sabha. That means he will not sit on the Speaker's chair. He shall not have the right to speak. No, he will have the right to speak. He will be sitting just like any other member of the Parliament, he can speak. He shall not be entitled to vote on the resolution in the first instance. This is also wrong. A, one only is correct. Because normally what happens, Speaker has something called a casting vote. For example, Lok Sabha is debating a bill, voting upon a particular bill. On this bill, 200 MPs are saying yes, 200 MPs are saying no. So we don't have a majority because there is a tie. To resolve this tie, I as the speaker will have a casting vote. I will either vote in favor or against, just to resolve this deadlock. So I do not vote in the first instance when the MPs of Lok Sabha are voting. I vote in case there is a tie. But if I am to be removed from my office, for that I will vote in the first instance, not in case there is a tie. Okay. With reference to Indian Parliament, consider the following statements. A bill pending in the Lok Sabha lapses on its dissolution. Again, this is something that you would not have been able to answer if you would have only read NCERT. So when Lok Sabha is dissolved, all bills lapse. Lapse in the sense they are dead, except three types of bills. Bills which originate in Rajya Sabha and are pending in Rajya Sabha. These bills do not lapse because Rajya Sabha is the permanent house. Bills which are awaiting President's assent, waiting for the signature of the President, these bills also do not lapse. Bills on which the President has notified joint sitting, because I told you, in case there is a deadlock, one house accepts a bill, the other house does not. To resolve that deadlock, we have a joint sitting. This is where Lok Sabha prevails, or the will of the Lok Sabha prevails over Rajya Sabha. With reference to the Indian Parliament, consider the following statement. A bill pending in Lok Sabha lapses on its dissolution. If a bill is pending in Lok Sabha, does it lapse on its dissolution? Yes. A bill passed by Lok Sabha and pending in Rajya Sabha lapses on the dissolution of the Lok Sabha. Yes. Because a bill has been passed by Lok Sabha, that means where is the origin? What is the origin of this bill? Lok Sabha. But which bill does not lapse? If the origin is also Rajya Sabha, if it is pending in also Rajya Sabha. But this bill, the origin is Lok Sabha and is pending in Rajya Sabha, it lapses. A bill in regard to which the President notified his or her intention to summon the houses to a joint sitting lapses upon the dissolution of the Lok Sabha. It does not lapse. Because the President notifying a joint sitting, the bill does not lapse. B is the right answer. Clear? Very good. With reference to Parliament of India, consider the following statements. Prorogation of a house by the President of India does not require the advice of the Council of Ministers. President can't do anything without the aid and advice of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. Which means if the session is to be terminated, because I told you there are 3 sessions of Parliament, normally, budget session, monsoon session, winter session. If the winter session is to be ended, terminated, that's what we call prorogation. That power is with the President, who does this on the advice of the government. So prorogation of a house by President does not require the advice of the Council of Ministers. It does. Prorogation of a house is generally done after the house is adjourned sine die, but there is no bar to the President of India prorogating the house which is in session. We have not discussed this because it was not part of the NCERT, but maybe this will help. Dissolution of Lok Sabha is done by President of India, who, save in exceptional circumstances, does so on the advice of the Council of Ministers. C is the right answer. All of you are right. That's why I mentioned, highlighted Article 109. Which of the following statements are correct in respect of money bill? Article 109 mentions special procedure in case of a money bill. A money bill shall not be introduced in the Council of States. The Rajya Sabha can either approve the bill or suggest changes but cannot reject it. The amendments to money bill suggested by the Rajya Sabha have to be accepted by the Lok Sabha. 1, 2, 3. C is the right answer. That brings us to the closure of this session. We will meet again tomorrow, 6 o'clock in the evening, and discuss judiciary. And if you have understood the topics, concepts that we discussed today, do let me know in the comment section and share your feedback of this NCERT course in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Good night. Goodbye.